Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. اللهم صل وسلم دائما أبدا أبدا على حبيبك خير خلقه محمد وآله وأصحابه وأهل بيته وعترته وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. Respected brothers, sisters, and my dearest children, and all the community members in UK, Canada, and wherever people are joining us in our weekly Seeratul Nabi series, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We are now, Alhamdulillah, lesson number 49, starting lesson number 49. And so far we have seen that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the days of his struggles and sacrifice, that period of 13 years of Makkah is now in the background. He has now moved on, and he, as we mentioned in the last couple of lessons, he traveled through the Tariqul Hijrah, guided by one of the person who was hired, and with his companion Hazrat Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala an, he arrives in the first week of Rabiul Awwal on the small town or village on the outskirts of Madina Munawwara, which is known as Quba. And it's most probable that although the people who are saying in some riwayat it is 12th of Rabiul Awwal, but according to Ibn Hisham, probably it is Rabiul Awwal, maybe first week of Rabiul Awwal, and definitely it was a Monday he arrived. And then Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam stayed for 3 days, in 3-4 days there in Quba, and that was basically, as we mentioned in before, waiting for Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala an and Hazrat Aisha and Asma radiallahu anhuma to come and join them. And he, of course, had left Hazrat Ali behind, as we know, to distribute and give back all the trusts which the kuffar and mushrikeen had given to the Prophet ﷺ, and they would leave with him, even though he had become Muslim and he had become a prophet, but they still considered him as Sadiqul Amin and trustworthy. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam left all those things with Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala an. And Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala an, we find from the Seerah books that he made it back through the fast route, I think 2-3 days after the arrival of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he arrived maybe around Wednesday. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came on Monday, and he came back after distributing everything in Makkah, and he arrived. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, now the first thing, and we know this from all the way through Madina Munawwara and his life, that the first thing which Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam established was the masjid, even before thinking about his own place of living or house. So masjid, he initiated the foundation of Masjid Quba, in these 3-4 days. And Masjid Quba has been mentioned in the ahadith. In fact, Quran also Allah Ta'ala is mentioning about, and most mufassirin, they say that the ayat which was revealed, La masjidun ussisa ala taqwa min awwali yawmin, yani from the first day, the masjid which was based on taqwa and fear of Allah Ta'ala. That is, most ulama refer it to Masjid Quba, and in its Allah has praised it in its purity, because when we look at the details, we find that the people there, when they were relieving themselves, they would not just use the they were also using the water to purify themselves after relieving themselves. So there was a special addition, and because of that, Allah Ta'ala has praised them. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, if you like, laid the first bricks of Masjid Quba, and then he moved on, and I think he moved on around the Friday morning. He left Quba, and on the way, his first ever Juma Salat. Right. So don't forget, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has not been able to perform the Juma in Makkah Mukarramah because of the conditions there. Although this fard of Juma was established already in Medina, because Hazrat Mus'ab bin Umair radiyallahu ta'ala an, who was sent by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam long before to teach the Ansar about Islam. So as soon as the farais of Salat came, and the Juma was established already according to the instructions of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the first Juma was performed by Mus'ab bin Umair radiyallahu in Medina. Now Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is now arriving. He leaves Quba and is arriving in Madina Munawwara, but in the middle there is a small village, and the time of Juma happens there. So there's a small village called Banu Salama, where Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam stops, and he performs his first Juma there. This is, and in fact, his first ever khutbah has been recorded by Ibn Hisham in his book of Seerah, and we find that it is a very simple khutbah, Juma khutbah. In fact, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam most often after whenever he would deliver any sermons or speeches, it would be very concise and not too long, basically very short and concise, but very meaningful to the people. And so Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam delivered the two khutbah which have been recorded, and one of the main khutbah which we all say as imams in the Jummah, either in the first khutbah or the second khutbah. Inna alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu wa nashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa nashhadu anna sayyidina wa Muhammadan sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So this is a very concise, in fact very meaningful, and in the riwayat is mentioned that this khutbah itself, it was such a strong package of dawat, invitation, that many people, they entered Islam because of this. Because, the way it has been structured by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in a very beautiful way, which includes everything, the praising of Allah Ta'ala, asking help from Allah Ta'ala, and praising Allah Ta'ala, and requesting Allah Ta'ala, and asking Allah Ta'ala before starting that, oh Allah, save us from the evil and shurur of our nafs, our self-desire and temptations. وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنْ شُرُورِ أَنفُسِنَا وَمِنْ سَيِّئَاتِ أَعْمَالِنَا, and from all our bad actions. And then مَن يَهْدِ اللَّهُ فَلَا مُضِلَّ لَهُ وَمَن يُضْلِلْهُ فَلَا هَادِيَ لَهُ. One whom Allah Ta'ala guides, no one can misguide him, and one who is misguided by Allah Ta'ala, no one can guide him. So, all this, and many people, actually, it is mentioned, many poets of those time and the great intellectuals, when they heard this khutbah. So this khutbah was delivered by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, maybe 3-4 minutes khutbah. So it was the practice of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. This has also been mentioned in the books, that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in terms of giving khutbah, they were very small and concise, but the salat itself, he would lengthen the salat, and the tilawat of Quran in the salat, that would be, unfortunately, nowadays it has become the opposite. I remember the time when I was about to start the Juma Salat, and one of the brothers said, Shaykh, my meeting is at 2 o'clock. Can you please limit your qiraat to Inna Atayna and Qul Huwallah? So but Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam used to read, a little bit longer surah in the Juma, whereas the speech and the khutbah would be very limited and concise. And so Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam delivered this in Banu Salama, and then from there he moved on and arrived, as we saw last week in the last lesson, he arrived in Madina Munawwara, or more than 400-500 people were dressed in armor and everything to receive Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's camel kept moving until it was ordered by Allah Ta'ala to sit down in this empty field, which was near the house of Abu Ayyub Ansari radiallahu ta'ala. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he actually became the guest of Hazrat Abu Ayyub Ansari. We saw all this in the last lesson. And so now, after arriving here, what is the first thing Rasulullah? And this is something which we have to understand, that wherever we go as Muslims, Rasulullah, if you look at, he arrives in Quba on Monday, and then by Friday he is in Madina Munawwara. So in a space of 5 days, 5-6 days, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has established or has initiated 3 masajid. First, the foundation of Quba Masjid was laid, and then he moved on. He prayed the Juma at Banu Salama, and then moved on from there. And then, after arriving, the first thing he said, that who does this land belongs to? And it was the 2 orphans children, Sahal and Suhail. Their father had passed away and left this land for them. They were both Muslims, alhamdulillah. They offered the place, but Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not accept. He said, no, we are going to purchase it, buy it, and then convert it into masjid. And the masjid was started, and Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself was busy in constructing the first. In fact, in the Ibn Hisham has written that the first person, and in fact a very interesting story has been written about the first person who, Yasir ibn Ammar, Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu ta'ala, who, don't forget, his parents gave the shahada. His mother was the first, one of the first of the shuhada, the first woman. In fact, she got the status and the honor of being the first person in Islam to give the life for the sake of for Islam. That status has gone to a woman, Hazrat Sumayya radiallahu ta'ala anha. And so Hazrat Ammar radiallahu ta'ala an, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sees him carrying very heavy, well, nowadays we use the bricks, but in those days they were using heavy stones, in fact. So he was actually carrying 2 stones on his head. And obviously someone must have put this, and he came past Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and just as a casual joke, he said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, look how much weight they have put on my head, and they just want to kill me. They're killing me by putting so much weight on my. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, at that point, he made a remark which went down in the history. And in fact, it was a prediction and one of the miracles of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we are seeing all the way along, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said to Ammar, Ammar, they are not killing you. In fact, they are trying to make your Jannah, but the person, the people who will kill you will be those who will go out of bound of Islam. Right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam just mentioned that, and this was a prediction. And then he said that the last thing you are going to drink before you die or before you are killed will be milk. So as he's carrying these bricks, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes up with this, and of course we know that way after the demise of, and in fact in the time of after Hazrat Usman radiallahu ta'ala, when the conflict started between Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala and Hazrat Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anh, and Hazrat Ammar, in fact, was on the side of Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala anh, and Hazrat Aisha was also there. And at that time, he was killed by the opposite party. And then before dying, before being killed, the last thing he drank was the milk. So then the Sahaba remembered what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned at this time, of the building. So anyway, Hazrat Ammar radiallahu ta'ala was one of the first people who initiated the building of the masjid. There are some historical aspects which are worth noting, like he was the first. In fact, when in Quba, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually stayed in the house of Kulsum ibn Hidam. The person has been mentioned, the Sahabi, who was very elderly, and in fact, and then after 3-4 days he moved on, and he was in fact also noted as the first Muslim after the arrival of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam who died, and his grave was made in Madina Munawwara. So he was the one who actually made the nusra of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his grave was the first in Madina Munawwara. So Hazrat Ammar radiallahu ta'ala was the first who was carrying and so the masjid was built, and all around we found that Sahaba, they actually built their structures and houses around it, so that their back door was an entrance into the Masjide Nabawi. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, established this first. It was long after, his house was actually, temporary structures were placed around the masjid, and their back door opened so that they would come into and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as we found that at the time of his demise, before passing away, he asked all the doors to be closed from the back side, that no one is allowed to enter the masjid except for, Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala an. He would leave, which was a hint, an indication that, the next Khalifa in line would be Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala. And so there were only three main doors of Masjid Nabawi which were built, which in fact are still around, there, Babur Rahma, and Babur Nisa and Bab Jibril. So these three are still there. These were built, and then of course after a while the houses, the two houses, in fact, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, at this stage of arriving, this is on the the start of the Hijrah calendar also. We will talk about that later, inshallah. But so it's sort of 13, 14 year after Nabuw-wah, and Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Hazrat Khadija has already passed away, and now he's married to Hazrat Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. But there is one other lady, elderly lady, in fact, Hazrat Sauda. We find that she was also became the Ummahatul Mu'mineen. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam married her, and she was actually looking for opportunities to please Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and she came and said, Ya Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I want to acquire your pleasure, and and what she did was, she said, I'm elderly, so although I'm your wife, but I want to give my turn to Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha. So the night you would spend with me, because I'm elderly, you can spend that same night just to please Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So these were the two houses which were built beside the masjid of Rasulullah, and then the other marriages which Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had, they came long after, and these are, of course, as we know, it was not out of temptation or desires, but it was because the orders of Allah Ta'ala, the ayat of the Quran were coming, so many surah about the family life, about life connected with women. They had to be practically demonstrated by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So because of that, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had to, was obviously ordered by Allah Ta'ala, instructed by Allah Ta'ala to have all these 9 houses, 9 marriages, so that all the commandments of Allah Ta'ala and all the instructions of the Quran, they would be passed on to the Ummah. So anyway, the structure of a masjid has been established, and initially, as we mentioned last lesson, that the Kaaba, the Qibla was actually Baitul Muqaddas at that time, but then later on in Madina Munawwara, Allah Ta'ala sent the ahkam to change the Qibla to in the opposite direction, to Baitullah, Makkah Mukarramah, and so the Qibla was changed. So the structure which was built as the Qibla, which was a bit, with some sort of covering at the top of the ceiling, that structure actually now became on the back side. And that was also another important foundation was laid there, and that became the place, or in fact the first Islamic institution, if you like, and the first Islamic madrasa or school was established by Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and that is known as Ashabus Sufa. That area, which when the Qibla was moved, now it became the back side, and the front side was Makkah Mukarramah and Qibla there. So the back side, that became the first institution, and that was in fact the important thing we have to take from the Seerah, that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, number one, in the space of 5-6 days, he became the means of establishing three places of praying and getting near to Allah Ta'ala. Quba, Banu Salama, he led the Jummah there, and then Masjid Nabawi. he arrived, and even before thinking about his own house, he established the masjid, and then masjid with the Islamic teachings was also established there. Right? So Rasulullah Sallallahu laid these foundations because, and from the Seerah, the main thing we get is that the masjid was the nucleus or the center point of a life of a Muslim. In fact, when we look at the life of Rasulullah Sallallahu himself, we find that Rasulullah Sallallahu was spending more time in masjid than in his house. Right? So he was actually spending more time in masjid. So in reality, the central or nucleus was the masjid. So for a mu'min or believer, when we look at the seerah, we find that the house is not the safest place for it. The masjid is the most safest place. And in fact, because Allah Ta'ala in the Quran is also saying, and Rasulullah Sallallahu has mentioned that the masjid is a place for the muttaqi, for those who have the fear of Allah Ta'ala. Those muttaqi means those who will feel comfortable, and the most comfort a muttaqi or a believer should get is not in his house but in the masjid itself. And we find that Rasulullah Sallallahu was spending more time in masjid. So in reality, from masjid, for the moment, our orientation of life is in the 24-hour, that from our house we go to the masjid and then come back to the house. Then we go to the job and come back to the house. Then we go and meet someone, come back to the house. Then we go to shopping, come back to. So our nucleus is the house. Whereas in the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu and the Sahaba, we find Rasulullah Sallallahu trained the Sahaba also that their main nucleus was the masjid. From the masjid, they went to the house to have some rest and then came back. And we find that the Sahaba, their timings were divided actually. In fact, shifts were made and organized in such a way that some Sahaba were always present in the masjid. If you like, half were present in the masjid, and those who were in the houses, they would spend half a day in the masjid and half a day in fulfilling the rights of the family and jobs and so on. And in the same way, in the night, even now, in the middle of the night, the Azaan is given. Some ulama, they say that was actually the announcement of the shift, that those now who are in the houses, their turn now is to come back to the masjid. And those who are in the masjid, fulfill the rights of Allah Ta'ala, now they should go back and fulfill the rights of their family. Spend the night, half a night in. So this way, if you look at the average of the life of the Sahaba, we find that that's how they had divided. So masjid actually was the nucleus. And from masjid, everything was happening. Masjid was the center of the knowledge. And masjid was the center of the Mushwara and consultation. Masjid was the place where Sahaba, they came prepared, so that Rasulullah Sallallahu after the Salat would tell them that now, some of you go in this east direction, or some of you will go in the north. So Sahaba, when they will come to the masjid, they would come prepared that what's going to happen after that, because that was the center and nucleus. That's how the masjid supposed to be. And according to the tartib of the seerah, we find that this is the center point of a Muslim, the masjid. Knowledge was distributed from there. All the aspect of socialization was taking place from there. And all the celebrations, nikah, for example, marriages, they would take place in the masjid. So from the terms of consultation, thinking, teaching, distribution of knowledge, socialization aspects, uh, all the all the things which govern our life in our 24-hour life, they were actually being uh, given from the masjid, or they were distributed in the world. So although the masjid itself physically was not well established, just stones and bricks, and in fact it was in such a weak structure that when it rained, the water would leak inside. But from there, in the whole world, the light of Islam was being distributed. This is how Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam established the masjid, right? So that's the important thing we take. And after uh, having built the masjid and has been created this structure, now the salat we find after the Isra and Miraj, when Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came back, the 5 times salat, in fact, it's mentioned in the riwayat, there were just 2 rakat for each salat. 2 rakat for Fajr, 2 rakat for Zuhr, 2 rakat for Asr, and that's how it used to be. But then the proper structure of the farais, the Fajr remained as the 2 rakat as before, but the others like Zuhr became 4, and Asr became 4, and Maghrib became 3, and Isha became 4. All this structure was established in Madina Munawwara after the arrival. So this happened, and then Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam collected the Sahaba and consulted, made Mushwara with them. And this was actually instruction of Allah Ta'ala in the Quran. وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ, that make consultation for anything related to Islam, make Mushwara with yourself. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was instructed especially, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَوَكِّلِينَ. That whenever you have any issue or situation, consult with Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was actually instructed to make Mushwara with the Sahaba. And what was the benefit or the reasoning behind this? Because the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was the last prophet. Now the prophethood is ending. The seal of prophethood is Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, is the seal of the prophethood. However, Islam, Allah Ta'ala has decided to continue until the day of judgment. So who is going to carry the Islam forward? This important responsibility has been now passed on to the Ummah. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had to make sure that they were fully trained to carry the effort of the prophets forward as the ummati, as the followers, because no other prophet. He is the seal, he is the Khatamun Nabiyyin, he is the last prophet. And so one of the important aspects was the Mushwara. And we find that one very important incident, which in fact the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam called the Sahaba and said, now we are performing the Salat. How do we call the people for the Salat? We have to find a way. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam consulted with the Sahaba. And he's actually preparing them, teaching them that, after I go, the Islam still has to continue, and you have to carry this banner forward. So you have to be prepared for it. You have to have the understanding and the ability to think and make. And that's why in the time of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, even though he was receiving revelation and he was getting he was the most intellectual person, and he could decide whatever he want, but still Allah Ta'ala is telling him, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, make Mushwara with the Sahaba. Why? So to show to the people until the day of judgment that, you know, the help and nusrat and support of Allah Ta'ala will not cease after the demise of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, will still continue with the Sahaba and with the Ummah until the last day. Right? And so, you know, this consultation was made that how do we call people? And some Sahaba came up with the opinion, why don't we use the way of the Nasara, that they use the bells to collect people, or use the way of the Yahud. You know, in those days they would use the, you know, it was like a sort of a horn or bugle or something. You know, different names have been mentioned. I think maybe shofar or shofar, not the chauffeur who drives the car, but there's another instrument, in fact, which like a horn. So they use that to if they have a, you know, if they want to collect the people, and many other ideas came with the Sahaba. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave this fikr, this concern, that we need to call the people. Although he is a prophet and he's getting revelations, he's being complete, he's totally in connection with Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. He could have made very easy decision himself, but he wants to involve the Sahaba now, right? And give them this concern and worry that you have to make the fikr for Islam, right? And so the Sahaba, they take this concern, they all go back, and you know, one of the ordinary Sahabi, and you know, we hardly know anything about him. In fact, Hazrat Abdullah ibn Zayd radiallahu ta'ala is one of the Sahabi. We don't find much about him apart from the fact that he is the one who came back with the idea of Azaan. Right? And so, because he took the fikr, you know, he took the concern that, you know, how do we call people for the Salat, 5 times Salat? And everyone went home. And you know, Abdullah ibn Zayd, he says that I went to sleep, and in my sleep, because I was worrying, you know, what we should do. And this shows that, you know, sometimes you don't need big abilities or intellect to come up with, you know, ideas for Islam. Allah can use anyone, right? Allah has the ability to use even small birds, ababil, to help and support Islam. So Allah can use anyone. Allah doesn't need that, you know, big intellectual should sit down if there's some decision has to be made. No, we should involve everyone. The entire ummah, the ability has been distributed, and they are given the task and responsibility of carrying the banner of Islam forward. Right? So this is the only message, you know, I find I get from this incident, that this Sahabi, he sleeps, and then in the night, you know, he is dreaming, because he's sleeping with this figure, how we should call people to. So in the dream, he sees that he's in a shop, and he's trying to and someone is selling you know, these bells and instruments or something, and he says, well, how much are these? I want to buy this, because, you know, we were discussing with this is in his dream, we are discussing with the Prophet ﷺ how to call the people towards the Salat. So the person in the dream says, well, instead of me selling you these things, should I not tell you a better way which you can use to call the people? And he said, yes, please tell me. And this is all happening in his dream. And this person now, probably an angel or whoever, and he's being inspired in the dream, is saying, you know, you should say, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And the full azan he's been given to him. And subhanallah, where he gets up and this dream is so vivid in his mind, you know, that he comes to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and notice that this Sahabi is unknown Sahabi. He is not very famous or renowned or one of the great intellectuals. No, ordinary Sahabi. And but Allah Ta'ala inspired him. He came running to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, I had this dream. And in this dream, this person said to me, use this to call. And he started repeating it. Allahu Akbar, Allahu. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as soon as he heard this, he said, this is a true dream. Right? And of course, you see, so there are many points ulama have mentioned that, obviously no rules of Sharia can be based on dreams, right? But in this case, we find an ordinary Sahabi, Abdullah ibn Zayd, he comes, he tells Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after hearing it, he declares it, that this is Sharia. This is the way we are going to use to call the Azaan. And in fact, of course, he is the one who is initiating this. So he's expecting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say to him that, go and call the people with the dream you had. But he didn't say that. He said, now he gave this another task to another Sahabi. And this is Hazrat Bilal radiallahu ta'ala. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is distributing the responsibilities. And in distribution of the responsibilities is not looking at, that this person is from my tribe or my member. No. Anyone who has who takes the concern and fikr of Islam is responsible and could lead the way in Islam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam now assigns Hazrat Bilal radiallahu ta'ala. Out of all the people, Hazrat Bilal, who is, if you look at his physical features, he doesn't have any special family background or anything. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, your voice is good and loud, so I want you to go and repeat the words with Abdullah ibn Zayd is saying. And in fact, he told Abdullah to go with him. Right? So, and Abdullah went up and with Hazrat Bilal radiallahu ta'ala, and Hazrat Bilal radiallahu ta'ala now he is saying it first. So his desire is also fulfilled in reality. Ulama, they say, Ibn Hisham has written that this person, he came up with this. So he's saying Allahu Akbar first, then Hazrat Bilal is saying it loudly too. And then, so initially he says, and then Hazrat Bilal calls out the Azaan, and that was in fact used. So very important lessons. In fact, now the time is, we've run out of time. Again, interesting. So, the masjid is the nucleus for the Muslims. And inshallah, we'll continue how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, now is using this second phase of his Nabuw-wah life, if you like. The first is the 13 years of Makkah. Now second, and inshallah we will mention about how the calendar, Islamic calendar, is established. There was no way of telling times and dates in those days, apart from the fact that they would just use a special occasion, a special incident which happened in the year, and they would name it the year of that thing, right? So but now the calendar will be established. Plus now another important aspect, which will be, inshallah, we'll cover in the next lesson, how Rasulullah established the Islamic institution, Ashabu Sufa, the Sufa, who were these people and what, and they were actually if you like, the brains of Islam, who had devoted their entire life for the sake of Islam. They had nothing else to do. And then also the Muhajirin who came now, most of the people migrated. And how many were? There were just a hand, around, it's mentioned around maybe 83 people who had become Muslim in Makkah. They are all migrated. Now how Rasulullah, what system Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam created, the social system and the economical system, to bring these people who have left everything behind in Makkah, and now they are here. So inshallah, very interesting aspects where we can learn a lot from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are aspects which are not normally, understood or covered. May Allah Ta'ala give us the ability to follow the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun alal mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.